Before we start, think like a gardener who has to make do with what he already has.
Let's do something a little uncomfortable for a minute. Imagine every garden center within 50 miles of your house closed tomorrow morning. No bagged compost, no liquid fertilizer, no rooting hormone, no seed trays, no insect spray, nothing in a bag, nothing in a bottle, nothing with a barcode on it. Now walk out to your garden and answer honestly. How much of it would stop working? If you're anything like me, that question stings. I've solved more than one garden problem with a credit card instead of a shovel. Mountain families had that same situation. Except for them, it wasn't a thought experiment. It was Tuesday. Now, I want to be careful here, because this is where videos like this go sideways. I'm not going to tell you that being poor was good for people. It wasn't. Folks lost gardens, lost seed, and sometimes a great deal more. But there's a difference between romanticizing hardship and paying attention to what hardship taught. When you can't buy your way out of a garden problem, you're forced to understand it. And somebody who understands water, soil, seed, and timing can do remarkable things with a wheelbarrow and a pile.
That is the thread I want you to watch for. Understanding first, buying second.
Of leaves. So that's today. 25 low-cost methods. Some are well documented in Appalachian tradition. Some are general old-time rural practice that showed up from Vermont to Georgia, and I'll say so. I'm not stamping the word Appalachian on something to make it sound more romantic. And everyone lands in one of three piles. Still makes sense. Needs modifying. Or modern science says quit doing it. Because there's a method on this list that half the internet calls free fertilizer, and using it the way most people recommend can quietly ruin a good garden. That one's 4 minutes out. Here's the first thing worth understanding about an old mountain garden. Hardly anybody.
Once you see fertility as something you move, the obvious place to begin is already underfoot.
Was buying fertility. They were moving it. Start with the cheapest thing on your property in October. Leaves. A leaf is a whole summer of sunlight and minerals that a tree pulled out of the ground and handed back. Old-time gardeners didn't rake leaves to the curb, mostly because there wasn't a curb. Extension people say the same today, with more syllables. Shredded leaves make excellent mulch, hold moisture, moderate soil temperature, and break down into leaf mold. The finest soil conditioner you can get for nothing. One correction everybody skips: whole leaves mat. A thick layer of unshredded maple turns into something close to a shingle, and rain runs off instead of through. Run the mower over them once. 4 inches in fall will be down around 3 by spring. Now here's what people miss about old-time composting. It wasn't about producing a product called compost. It was about refusing to let fertility walk off the property. Kitchen scraps, crop residue, bedding, corn stalks, spoiled hay, all of it circled back. Nobody was measuring a carbon to nitrogen ratio. They were answering a different question than we do. We ask, what should I buy for this bed?
But keeping everything on the property only works when what you keep is safe to return.
They asked, what's leaving this place that ought to stay? One modern correction, and this one has teeth. Diseased plant material and seed-heavy weeds don't belong in a backyard pile. Killing most plant pathogens takes a pile holding around 150 degrees, and honest backyard piles rarely get there and stay there. That vine covered in leaf spot goes in the trash. Grass clippings are free nitrogen, and most of it gets bagged and set out on the road. But here, the old advice needs a correction that'll save you a smell you won't forget. Fresh clippings piled thick mat together, oxygen can't get through, and 4 days later there's a slimy gray layer under your tomatoes, so wilt them. Mow when the grass is dry, lay down an inch or two at a time, add more next week. And here's what nobody's grandfather had to worry about. If that lawn's been treated for dandelions or broadleaf weeds, the clippings go nowhere near your vegetables. Some lawn herbicides persist for months. Return clippings to the lawn for 2 or 3 mowings after a treatment and read the label. Now let's talk.
This is where old practice and modern food safety have to sit at the same table.
About manure, because I'd be doing you a disservice if I gave you the romantic version. Barnyard manure was the backbone of the old fertility system, and it's still some of the best soil-building material there is. But raw manure can carry E. coli, salmonella, and other things you do not want on a lettuce leaf. That's not squeamishness. It's why there are actual standards. USDA's organic rules put a number on it. Raw manure goes on at least 120 days before you harvest anything whose edible part touches the soil. Greens, root crops, strawberries, tomatoes too, since rain splashes soil onto low fruit. 90 days for crops, well clear of the ground. For a home garden that becomes one habit, raw manure goes on in the fall, gets worked in, and you plant a cover crop over it. What you never do is side dress a growing plant with fresh manure.
Now we hit the example that proves free is not the same thing as harmless.
Or use dog, cat, or pig waste in a food garden because of the parasites they carry. All right, here's the one I promised you, wood ash. Spend 10 minutes online and somebody will tell you fireplace ash is free garden fertilizer. That's about a third true. And the missing two-thirds is where gardens get hurt. When wood burns, the nitrogen and sulfur go up the chimney as gas. What's left is mostly calcium carbonate, the same active ingredient as agricultural lime, plus a shot of potassium and some trace minerals. Almost no nitrogen at all. So wood ash isn't really fertilizer. It's a fast-acting limbing material that happens to carry some potash with it, which changes the question entirely. It isn't, is ash good? It's, does my soil need lime? And there's exactly one way to know, and it runs $15 or $20 at your county extension office, a soil test. Because if your ground already sits at 6.5 or above, ash pushes it the wrong way. And when soil goes too alkaline, nutrients physically present in your dirt become chemically unavailable to the plant. Phosphorus, iron, boron, zinc. The test says they're there. The plants can't reach them. That's miserable to diagnose because everything looks like a deficiency and nothing you add fixes it. Potato scab gets worse at higher fat. And if you've got blueberries, azaleas, or rhododendrons, ash is the last thing on earth you want near them. Oregon State adds a point that stuck with me. Heat with wood and you'll make far more ash in a winter than a garden can absorb, and repeated heavy dumping in one corner of the yard can effectively sterilize the spot. So here's the working version. Soil test first. If your ground is acidic and low in potassium, ash is genuinely useful. Sift out the chunks. Stay under roughly 10 pounds per 100 square feet a year, worked in about 2 weeks before planting. Skip winter applications, since the potassium and phosphorus wash away before anything's growing. Keep it off.
That rule is bigger than ash. A leftover is useful only when it solves a real soil need.
Germinating seed. And never mix ash with nitrogen fertilizers like urea or ammonium sulfate. That releases ammonia gas. Use the waste because the soil needs it, not because the waste is free. Fertility was only half the mountain problem. You can get plenty of rain in these hills and still have a thirsty garden because sloped ground doesn't hold.
If water disappears faster than you can carry it, start by changing the ground.
What falls on it, which is why nearly every old water trick is about the same thing. Not finding more water, losing less. Start with the ground itself over winter. A bare bed from October to April is 5 months of rain hitting naked soil and carrying topsoil downhill. So people planted something over it. Rye, wheat, barley, oats, clovers, hairy vetch, winter peas. West Virginia University's extension folks lay out both halves of why that works. The cereal grains have fine, fibrous roots that hold soil against erosion. The legumes partner with rhizobia bacteria, which pull nitrogen out of the air into a form the next crop can use. And cover crops improve water infiltration and moisture retention while outcompeting weeds. The cheap version is cheap.
Before adding more water, ask what is exposing the moisture you already have.
One bed, a handful of seed in September, cut down in spring before it sets seed. Now here's the idea I most want you to take out of this section. The cheapest irrigation system you will ever install is the evaporation you prevented. Think about what bare soil does in July. Sun hits it directly, the surface dries, and moisture keeps wicking up from below to replace what left. Your ground is quietly pumping water into the sky all day. Cover that dirt with 2 or 3 inches of shredded leaves or straw, and the sun heats the mulch instead of the soil. The ground stays cooler. Weeds that would have been drinking your water never germinate, and the moisture down there stays long enough for roots to use. Nobody in 1910 was calculating evapotranspiration rates, but they knew a mulched row went longer between waterings, and that mattered when...
Once you stop wasting water, the next move is simple. Save some rain for later.
Water came up the hill in a bucket. So before you buy a soaker hose, mulch one bed properly and watch your watering schedule change. A lot of folks find they were solving a covering problem by adding water. Then there's catching what falls. Barrels under the eaves, cisterns dug in, wash tubs set out. And the idea underneath is worth saying plainly. They weren't creating water. They were moving water through time. It rained Sunday, and that rain is still there Wednesday. But this is a modify it, and the modification matters enough that I won't soften it. Extension guidance is clear that rain barrel water is not drinkable, and generally should not touch the edible part of a plant. Roof runoff carries bird droppings, animal waste, and depending on the roofing material, metals and chemicals. Nobody's testing it, and you can't see or smell the problem. So use it on ornamentals, shrubs, trees, and lawn. In the vegetable garden, put it on the soil, not the plant. Keep it off leafy greens entirely, since the leaf is the part you eat. Wash produce with clean water, and screen that barrel, or you've built a mosquito nursery. Before sprinklers, watering was aimed. You poured it where it mattered, because you weren't hauling an extra bucket for nothing. That's still the efficient way. Minnesota Extension's advice is to water as close to the soil surface as possible, and if you use a sprinkler, one that puts water low to the ground rather than throwing it high where much of it evaporates. Watering at the base also keeps foliage dry, which matters enormously for disease. And there's a trick that goes with it. Build a rim. A low circular mound of soil, 3 or 4 inches high, out at the edge.
On level ground, that basin works. On a hill, gravity becomes part of the problem.
Edge of the root zone. Extension still recommends that around newly planted trees and shrubs, and it works just as well around a squash hill. It turns a poured bucket into a slow soak instead of runoff. 90 seconds with a hoe. And if you garden on a slope, there's one more. Rows running straight up and down a hill or a highway. Every furrow becomes a channel. Water picks up speed, and speed is what carries topsoil away. Run them across the hill instead. The USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service describes contour rows as forming hundreds of small dams. Slower water, more infiltration, and soil loss cut by as much as half compared with farming up and down the slope. It works best on grades of 2 to 10%. I'm not telling you to build terraces. The backyard version is 3 things.
We have talked about keeping soil and water. Mountain families also learned how to keep genetics.
Orient beds across the slope. Keep the soil covered, and after the next hard rain, go look at where the water actually ran. Sometimes irrigation isn't about bringing water in. It's about stopping gravity from carrying it out. Now we get to the part that's less about technique and more about inheritance. Seed saving in the Mountain South is genuinely well documented. This isn't vague folk memory. Bill Best, who grew up in Haywood County, North Carolina, spent decades collecting Appalachian bean varieties. Greasy beans, a distinct pole bean, are concentrated in western North Carolina and eastern Kentucky, and whole varieties carry family names because that's who kept them alive. Rosen Kent, who directs the Appalachian Studies Center at the University of North Georgia, describes the region's heirloom seeds as varieties never bought or sold, passed family to family. That's a different relationship with a seed than most of us have with a rack at the hardware store. So let's make it practical. Open-pollinated versus hybrid. Open-pollinated seed comes back roughly like the parent. Save it, plant it, get what you had. Hybrid seed usually sprouts fine, but the next generation is...
Owning seed is not the same as improving it. Selection is where the gardener shapes the future.
It's a lottery, and often a disappointing one. That's not a knock on hybrids. Plenty are excellent plants bred for real disease resistance. It's just that a hybrid is a rental. An open-pollinated variety is something you can own. Now here's where most people get seed saving exactly backwards. Everybody reaches for the biggest, prettiest fruit on the vine. 2-pound tomato, perfect shoulders, save that one. But think about what you're saving. You're not saving the fruit. The fruit gets eaten either way. You're saving the plant that made it. So choose the best parent, not the biggest child. Look at the whole plant. Was it healthy all season or covered in leaf spot by August? Did it keep producing? Did the fruit crack after a heavy rain, and plainly? Did it taste like something? Minnesota Extension makes the disease point directly. Only save seed from healthy plants, because a great many diseases ride right on the seed. A 2-pound tomato off a sickly vine isn't a prize. It's next year's problem with excellent marketing, which leads somewhere people find surprising. Walk your garden after a rough August. Most plants look ragged. Then there's one that doesn't. Maybe the fruit's smaller, but the plant is still standing there working. That plant is telling you something specific about your soil, your slope, your humidity. Save from several good plants rather than one, so you keep some diversity. Do that a few years running and you're not saving seed anymore. You're selecting. You're nudging a variety toward your own piece of ground. That's the real meaning of those family bean lines. A catalog sells you a variety. A saved seed line records a place. But let's stay honest, because not every crop is worth the trouble. The easy ones are self-pollinating annuals. Beans, peas, tomatoes, peppers, lettuce. Their flowers largely pollinate themselves before they open, so they mostly stay true. The hard ones cross. Squash, cucumbers, melons, and pumpkins get crossed by insects. Corn gets crossed by wind. Minnesota Extension notes popcorn can pollinate a nearby stand of sweet corn on a windy day, and what you save is neither good sweet corn nor good popcorn. Biennials like carrots and beets won't make seed until year 2. Save your beans and tomatoes. Buy your squash seed. No shame in it. And then there's the part of seed saving that wasn't about money at all. People swapped. At church, over the fence, at funerals. It reads like generosity, and it was. But it was also insurance. If your seed jar got damp, or mice found it, or a wet spring killed the crop, the variety wasn't gone. It was 3 hollers over in somebody else's shed. Here's a way to think about it. If your bean seed disappeared out of your shed tonight, there's a fair chance somebody a few miles away is still growing that same bean, because somewhere back down the line, it came from the same hands. That's a backup system built out of neighbors. The modern version costs nothing. Seed libraries, spring swaps, master gardener groups. Give some away.
This section is less about killing pests and more about making the plant harder to reach.
The surest way to lose a variety is to be the only one who has it. All right, soil, water, and seed. That leaves the thing that eats all 3. And the old approach wasn't spraying everything. Most of the time it was putting something between the pest and the plant. Here's where I'd start, because it costs a cereal box. You walk out in the morning and a healthy tomato transplant is lying on its side, cut clean through at the soil line. Not wilted, not chewed, severed. That's a cutworm, the larva of a night-flying moth. It comes up out of the soil after dark, wraps around a tender stem and chews through it. One night, one plant, done. The old fix was whatever was flat and stiff. Newspaper, a tin can with both ends out, a piece of cardboard. Minnesota Extension still recommends exactly that. Cardboard or aluminum foil collars around transplants. One end pushed a few inches into the soil, the other extending several inches above ground. Notice both details, because that's what makes it work. Below the soil, so the cutworm can't tunnel under. Above it, so it can't climb over. Miss either and you've made a decoration. Cost, 0. 10 seconds a plant, done at transplanting instead of at a funeral, which points at something larger. Their most important pest tool may have been a pair of eyes in 10 minutes, turning leaves.
Observation tells you when to act. A physical barrier can buy the plant the time it needs.
Leaves over, checking the base of seedlings, finding egg clusters before they're caterpillars. A hornworm or squash bug is handled by hand when there are 6 of them. At 600, you're in a fight. Timing can replace chemistry, but only if you're actually looking. Then there's covering. And here the modern version is better and carries a warning. Old-timers set canning jars over tender seedlings on cold nights. Protection during the fragile stretch. The modern equivalent is floating row cover or insect netting. Flea beetles off eggplant, cucumber beetles off squash, cabbage worms off broccoli, plus a few degrees of frost protection. Here's the warning people ignore. Anything that needs bees cannot stay covered through bloom. Squash, cucumbers, melons, pumpkins. When flowers appear, that cover comes off or you get no fruit. Cornell and Maryland Extension both say it flatly. And watch heat, because under a cover it can run 5 to...
One material can sometimes protect in more than one way. Mulch is the best example.
15 degrees warmer, and tomato and pepper flowers start dropping above 90. The framing I like is this. You don't need season-long protection. You need protection during the expensive week. Now here's a connection that surprises a lot of experienced gardeners. Mulch isn't just a water strategy. It's a disease barrier. Early blight and septoria leaf spot overwinter and infected plant debris in the soil. Come spring, a hard rain hits bare dirt and those spores splash up onto the lowest leaves. That's how it starts, almost every year. From the ground up, put mulch over that soil and you've put a lid on the splash. Iowa State, NC State, and Minnesota all list mulching as a basic tool for reducing soil splash onto tomato foliage. Sit with that a second. One free material, leaves you are already raking. Handles moisture, weeds, soil temperature, erosion, and disease splash. 5 problems, 1 act, no money. And when disease does get established, the old answer was distance. Don't plant maters where you had maters. Modern recommendations back it up with numbers. Minnesota says let at least 2 years pass before tomatoes or peppers go back in the same spot. Iowa State recommends 3 or 4 years away from that whole family. Tomatoes, potatoes.
So far we have saved inputs. Now the garden starts producing something else for free, more plants.
Potatoes, peppers, eggplant, for blights. Pair it with sanitation. Pull badly infected plants instead of nursing them along, clean up debris at season's end, and remember that material doesn't go in your pile. Sometimes the cheapest disease treatment is 20 feet of distance and 1 year of patience. Which brings me to the section I like best, because this is where the garden starts paying you back in plants instead of vegetables. Start with strawberries, because most people are already growing a free nursery and treating it like a mess. A strawberry patch throws out runners, and at the tip of each one is a baby plant looking for dirt. NC State's propagation guidance is straightforward. Those plantlets can be rooted while still attached to the mother plant, then severed once they've taken hold. So instead of trimming runners off, guide them.
This next trick works because the branch never chooses between surviving and making roots.
Pin the runner down where you want to plant, or sink a small pot of soil beside the parent and pin the plantlet into it. A few weeks later, cut the cord, cost of a bent wire, versus $25 for plants you already own. Now here's the one to remember if you forget everything else in this video. Normally, when we want a new shrub, we take a cutting. We cut a branch off and ask it to survive with no roots and a finite amount of stored energy. A lot of the time it fails, and we blame the rooting hormone. The old way inverted the whole thing. Bend a low, flexible branch down to the ground. Bury a section, 2 to 4 inches deep, with at least one node under the soil. Leave the tip sticking up. Pin it with a bent wire or lay a rock on it. Then walk away. For weeks, that branch is still attached to the mother plant, still being fed, still getting water. And down where you bent and buried it, it starts putting out roots. Because bending and burying interrupts the flow of sugars down the stem, and they pool right at that bend, which is exactly what encourages rooting. NC State explains it in language worth remembering. Layering succeeds because water stress is minimized and carbohydrate levels stay high. In plain talk, the branch never gets thirsty, and never runs out of groceries. 6 to 12 weeks later, you check. When there's a real root system, then you cut it free. A rooted plant instead of a hopeful stick. It works on muscadine-type grapes, blackberries, forsythia, viburnum, currants. The old gardener didn't ask a cutting to survive without roots. He let it grow roots while it was still being fed by its mother. That said, cuttings have their place. And here's the honest thing about why they fail. Rooting hormone takes the blame for a lot of failures that were really timing failures. Different plants root from different wood. Some want softwood, taken in late spring while growth is still tender. Some want semi-hardwood in midsummer. Some want hardwood taken dormant. Take the right cutting at the wrong time, and no amount of powder will fix it. So look up what wood your plant roots from, and when. Sometimes the branch isn't failing you. It's just the wrong physiological age. Then there's the laziest form of free plants. Division, rhubarb, daylilies, hostas, chives, oregano, most clumping perennials. One established crown comes apart into 3 or 4 plants, each genetically identical to the parent. No seed.
There is one more kind of savings: changing the microclimate instead of buying more equipment.
No hormone, no pot. Dig it, split it with a spade or 2 forks back to back, replant the healthy outer pieces, and discard the tired center. Early spring or early fall, when the plant isn't trying to flower. Some plants aren't an expense at all. They're a savings account that pays dividends in plants. Which brings me to the last one, and it ties the whole video together. Before anybody had a greenhouse, people built a box, scrap lumber, 4 sides, a salvaged window on top, tilted south. That's a cold frame. It runs 5 to 10 degrees warmer than the outside air, extends your season on both ends, and hardens off seedlings without a shelf full of equipment. The historical version went further. Hotbeds were built over a pit of decomposing manure, and that decomposition warmed the bed from below. Clever, and I'd skip it in a food garden. Between the pathogen timing we talked about and the management it takes, it isn't worth it. Modern hotbeds use a soil heating cable instead, but the plain cold frame? Still excellent. The management is the entire game, and it's where people fail. Vent it. Iowa State's guidance is to raise...
And that brings us back to the larger point. The cheapest tool here was paying attention.
Raise the sash when the air inside goes above 85 degrees and close it before sunset. A closed frame on a bright February afternoon will cook everything inside while you're at the store. And here's the real lesson. Bigger than a wooden box. They figured out you could change a plant's environment before you bought something to change the plant. There were 25 ideas in this video. But underneath all of them was really just one habit. Nothing left the place until somebody asked whether the garden could use it first. Leaves, rain off the roof, seed, grass, scrap wood, a runner off a strawberry plant, kitchen scraps, whatever the barn produced, and knowledge, handed to whoever happened to be standing there. Now, I said at the start, I wasn't going to romanticize any of this, and I meant it. Ash needs a soil test, not a shovel. Manure needs a calendar. Rain barrel water doesn't belong on your lettuce. Old doesn't automatically mean right, and I'd rather tell you that plainly than sell you a prettier story. But here's what does hold up. Poor in supplies didn't have to mean poor in knowledge. And most of what those gardeners knew wasn't secret, and it wasn't magic. It was noticed. They watched where the water ran after a storm. They watched which plant was still standing in late August. They watched what a pile of leaves turned into by May. You can start doing that this weekend, and it won't cost you a dime. Do me a favor before you go. Tell me in the comments which one of these your parents or grandparents actually used. Not which ones you've read about. Which ones you watched somebody do, with their hands, in a real garden. I read those, and about half the time I come away having learned something. And I put all 25 into a simple field guide. The old method, what modern science says about it, whether to use it, change it, or skip it. Plus the 7 old practices I would not copy blindly today. It's free, the link's below, and it's easier to have beside you in the garden than trying to remember this whole video. Take care of that ground. It'll take care of you.